There was a man called George, and George was shy. He couldn't speak with girls because he was shy. George was what? Shy. There was a man called George, and George was hesitant. George was not just shy, George was hesitant. When George wanted to speak, he would hesitate. He would pause, think too much, and then stay silent. Why did George stay silent? Because George was hesitant. George had many ideas. George had insightful ideas. But George rarely expressed his ideas. He wanted to express them, but he did not express them. Why didn't George express his ideas? Because George was hesitant. One day, George faced an unexpected situation. The manager asked George for his opinion. It was unexpected. George did not prepare for this unexpected moment. The situation was unexpected, and George felt pressure. What kind of situation was it? It was unexpected. George felt overwhelmed. The room was full of people. The attention was on George. George felt overwhelmed by the attention. He felt overwhelmed by the silence in the room. Why did George feel overwhelmed? Because the situation was unexpected, and George was hesitant. But then, something changed. George decided to confront his hesitation. He decided to confront his fear. To confront means to face, not to escape. George confronted the moment. George confronted the silence. What did George confront? George confronted his hesitation. George spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was clear. His words were not perfect, but they were honest. The room listened. The manager listened. People understood George. After that moment, George felt relieved. Relieved means the pressure was gone. George was relieved because he finally expressed his ideas. He expressed what he had always wanted to express. So, who was George at the beginning? George was hesitant. Who is George now? George is still careful, but he is no longer silent. George is still thoughtful, but he can confront difficult moments. George was hesitant. George confronted his hesitation. George spoke.